Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of BTTH Rebirth of Emperor Yang episode number 1 based on novel. So let's start. Reincarnation of Yang Emperor. Duki Mainland, Zhongzhou, Shuangdiyuan. Boom. Heaven and earth tremble, the void is broken, and the energy of heaven and earth continues to gather towards a milky energy vortex in the void. On the ground, countless people quietly watched what happened at the moment. Between heaven and earth, except for a few people, all people and warcraft fell to the ground and looked at the scene above the sky. Only the young man in white in the air burst out a hot light in his eyes. In a pair of bright eyes, there was full of fighting spirit, which made the whole void tremble. The space around the man's body is constantly impacted by the soaring war, so that the hard crack recovers again. It seems that as long as you add strength, the whole space will fall apart in an instant. When you look at the two figures standing beside you, you are full of exclamation. The strong man fighting the emperor is really so strong. Just the rise of the fighting spirit in the body will lead to continuous concussion and rupture of the space. The strong fighting emperor is indeed the real peak of fighting spirit on the mainland. Behind the young man in white, 4 men and 3 women, and 3 children who looked 11 or 12 years old, stood quietly. Several children surrounded the 2 beautiful women with their hands. The 2 beautiful shadows also bowed slightly and stretched out their hands to hold a younger child in their arms. Only one of them seems to be a little girl of 13 or 14 years old, who still stands on the void with her feet in the air and looks at her breath. It can't help being shocked. The little girl, who is only 14 or 15 years old, actually has reached the late stage of the 8-star duet. Such strength, even if we look at the whole fighting continent, can be matched by only a handful of people. Young people have such terrible strength. It's hard to imagine how terrible their strength will reach in the future, but even so, the little girl at the moment, her bright and beautiful eyes, is staring at the back in front of her. It doesn't look so straight. There is glittering water around her eyes. This scene also appeared in several children and 2 beautiful women beside him. The ruddy eyes made them can't bear to see the back in front of them again, for fear that they would really cry. However, if they don't see it, they are more afraid that they will never have a chance to meet it in the future. They are afraid that in a twinkling of an eye, the figure in front of them will suddenly disappear and never be found back. After all, what will happen today is unknown to them and him. The 2 beautiful women stared at the young man in white with light in their eyes. Their ruddy lips disappeared together. In their slightly reddish beautiful eyes, they showed a reluctant light. Although they wanted to say something, they were still blocked in their mouth after all. For the man in front of them, all they can do is trust them wholeheartedly. Believe in his strength, believe in his strength. Worry should not appear in his mind. As long as they believe in his strength, there is no doubt. Finally wait until this day. It seems that the ancestors' guess is right. Duty is not the end of the world. There is indeed a peak above duty. Xiao Yang stared at the jade bottle in his hand. There was a gorgeous different fire churning in the depths of his pupils, and the look on his face was getting hotter and hotter at the moment. At this moment, Xiao Yang clearly felt that the fighting spirit on his body began to fluctuate violently. The feeling that had not appeared for more than 10 years made Xiao Yang's heart hot at this time. Alas, if I had been there when Xiao Shen broke through, he might not have disappeared between heaven and earth. On one side, Jiyu Yuan, who heard what Xiao Yang said, couldn't help sighing. He looked ashamed and sighed in a slightly sad voice. When Xiao Yang heard this, he gave a broad smile, laughed at Jiyu Yuan and comforted him. Hehe, father-in-law, please rest assured that the ancestors of Xiao Shen did not completely disappear between heaven and earth. You? What are you talking about? Xiao Shen, he's not dead. As soon as Xiao Yang said this, Jiyu Yuan and Xiao Zhon standing next to him were shocked, and even Zhu Kuan's eyes lit up. Over the years, he has also heard a lot about Xiao Shen, and he admires him. At the moment, he is naturally very happy to know that Xiao Shen is not dead. Until after the good film carving, Jiyu Yuan asked Xiao Yang with a little trembling and excitement in his voice. All they knew was that in order to help Xiao Yang's soul break through the perfect system of heaven, Xiao Shen entered the empire, burned his residual soul, fought with the spirit of the tomb that day, and then dissipated between heaven and earth. But they didn't know that Xiao Yang collected the origin of his soul, so they were extremely shocked when they learned the news. After Xiao Yang explained the reason, they understood. Ha ha, ha ha. I knew that he could survive with the help of the heavenly tomb under such circumstances at the beginning. How could he die casually? Ha ha. Jiyu Yuan, who understood all this, also laughed bravely. The whole person seemed to become a lot younger in an instant. Xiao Yang also smiled. He knew that Jiyu Yuan had always felt sorry for the desolation of the Xiao family. After all, the Xiao family was also an ally of the Jiyu family. However, as soon as Xiao Xian died, the Xiao family was destroyed, but the ancient family did not give much due help. Jiyu Yuan was blocked by the elders of the family. The leader of the ancient family was also powerless and felt extremely guilty. In his heart, he always felt that the ancient family owed something to the Xiao family. Although Xiao Yang has become the emperor and the Xiao family has risen strongly again, his guilt for the martyrs of the Xiao family has not decreased much. Now he hears that Xiao Xian is not dead, there is still the possibility of resurrection, and his guilt naturally dissipates. As long as Xiao Xian resurrects and sees that the Xiao family is still alive and stronger than when he was there, everything will be nothing. No matter what Xiao Xian will say at that time, he can have sufficient reasons to face him. Haha, but Xiao Yang, you are a real boy. You didn't say such a big thing earlier. You made me feel guilty for so many years. Do you want to deliberately retaliate against me? When you come back, I will ask you to apologize to me. Jiyu Yuan's huge palm slapped Xiao Yang on the shoulder, his eyes looked at Xiao Yang tightly, and his mouth laughed and joked. Of course, Xiao Yang knew some other meanings, but he could only nod secretly. It seemed that he was aware of Xiao Yang's mind in his mouth. Jiyu Yuan immediately frowned and wanted to say something more, but Xiao Yang turned his voice, smiled and said again, "My father-in-law, I didn't mean to do it, but over the years, I'm not sure I can revive my ancestors. Therefore, I don't dare to make a conclusion. However, until today, I feel that the sole origin of my ancestors has changed, and I am confident that I will be able to resurrect my ancestors. As for this trip, I don't know if I can come back alive, but my son-in-law must do his best to come back and make an apology to his father-in-law." As soon as the voice fell, Xiao Yang's eyes looked at Jiyu Yuan for a moment, and Xiao Yang turned fiercely. He no longer paid attention to Jiyu Yuan, whose face became a little heavy, but looked at the strange milky white vortex that had stopped collecting the energy of heaven and earth in the void. Behind Xiao Yang's hands, the whole person's breath suddenly calmed down. Like an ordinary person without cultivation, his eyes looked at the white energy vortex only a few feet away from him, as if he wanted to see through the white energy vortex completely. Xiao Yang stood quietly in the void, but the momentum appeared out of thin air, like a sharp sword, rushed straight into the sky, cut the sky and pierced the void until the end of the void. In the 10 years since Xiao Yang became emperor, Xiao Yang has been to the tombs of many ancient strong emperors. Although most of them have been destroyed by outsiders, some have not been found by the world, but even so, some of the information obtained is still a cup of water cart salary for Xiao Yang. But even under such circumstances, it didn't stop until a year ago, and from then on, Xiao Yang had a strong hunch that Xiao Xian's resurrection method must be in the near future. Now, the premonition in Xiao Yang's heart has come. Xiao Xian's resurrection method exists in the milky energy vortex in front of him. Xiao Xian's ancestor and younger generation Xiao Yang can finally repay your good fortune. Xiao Yang looked at the milky white energy vortex in front of him and thought in his heart. Then she turned her head and looked at Zuna and Kaylin. The two women looked at Xiao Yang with red eyes. Their eyes were full of strong reluctance and love. Xiao Yang stretched out his hand to hold the two women together with their children in their arms and took a deep breath of the faint fragrance on them. Xiao Yang said in a reluctant tone, "Take care of yourself and your children when I come back." The two women silently closed their eyes and nodded in response. Then Xiao Yang looked at the little girl who also snuggled in her arms, leaned down, put on a loving warm smile at the corners of her lips, and then whispered, "Xiao Xiao, as a sister, I have to take care of my mother's two little brothers." Xiao Xiao listened to Xiao Yang's entrustment and finally couldn't help it. In her red beautiful eyes, crystal tears burst into her eyes. Her two slender arms also hugged Xiao Yang's neck. Her exquisite head leaned tightly against Xiao Yang's arms and cried loudly. When Zuna and Cai Lin saw this, their ruddy eyes became more and more red, and their bright tears were about to fall down like pearls. Seeing this scene, Xiao Yang heard his daughter crying in his arms. Naturally, he couldn't be quiet, but he also knew that if he couldn't keep stable at the moment, he was afraid that after he left, the family would worry about him all day. He quickly sorted out his inner emotions, and then Xiao Yang picked up Xiao Xiao snuggled in his arms. A warm smile appeared at the corners of his mouth, looked at Zuna and Kaylin, and joked. "Two girls, it's not a parting of life and death. It's just going to play in other places. It's not that you don't come back and cry. Don't you believe my strength?" Xiao Yang's words just came out. Zuna and Cai Lin quickly cleaned up their emotions on their pretty faces. They looked at each other and smiled reluctantly. Then they put Xiao Xiao in Xiao Yang's arms down, wiped away the tears on his pink face, and gently sent it between Zuna and Cai Lin. As soon as they turned around, they looked at the second old man not far behind them. These two elders seemed to be the two most important figures on Xiao Yang's growth path. First, his father, Xiao Zhan. Before he became familiar with Yarou Lao, Xiao Zhan firmly believed in him on his growth path, whether before, during or after the 3 years of waste time. Xiao Zhan was captured by the Soul Clan, which can be said to be the most regretful thing Xiao Yang had ever regretted. If he had not been young and frivolous at that time, his father would not have been captured. Of course, on the other hand, if Xiao Zhan had not been captured, it would have given Xiao Yang more motivation and desire for strength. I'm afraid he would not grow so fast. It's hard to say whether it's a blessing or a curse. The second one is the person who has the greatest influence on Xiao Yang and is also the most key. Yarou Lao. If it hadn't been for Xiao Yang's 3-year low, Yarou Lao wouldn't wake up. If it hadn't been for Xiao Yang's 3-year low, Xiao Yang wouldn't know how to bear it. If it hadn't been for those 3 years, Xiao Yang wouldn't precipitate a good cultivation foundation. If it hadn't been for those 3 years, Xiao Yang may not break his engagement with Nalan Yangran, or he may not win Yunlanzong. After 3 years of waste firewood, Xiao Yang got the name of waste, which was ignored and abused by thousands of people. After 3 years of waste firewood, Xiao Yang led Nalan to step on the door and withdraw her marriage. She signed a 3-year divorce. As a result, Yunlanzong's anger. But had it not been for these 3 years, Xiao Yang would not have dominated the Black Horn region at that moment. If it hadn't been for these 3 years, Xiao Yang couldn't have forcibly set up Yang League and dominated Gama Empire on his own. If it had not been for these 3 years, Zhongzhou mainland would never have had a chance with Xiao Yang. The Xiao clan will no longer exist. If it had not been for these 3 years, Xiao Yang could not have joined hands with Zhongzhou forces to establish Qianfu alliance, let alone achieve today's fighting emperor. Therefore, what Xiao Yang has now is inseparable from these two people. It can be said that without the encouragement and support of Xiao Zhan and the cultivation of Yarou Lao, Xiao Yang can only fall in a small corner of the continent after all. The wonderful mainland can only become the place he yearns for in his heart. Yarou Lao and Xiao Zhan. Yarou Lao has already reached the 6-star dual saint after so many years. Although Xiao Zhan is strong, Xiao Zhan has also reached the point of 3-star dual saint. Now, they are both the top strong men on the fighting mainland. Of course, even so, there are as many stronger people on the mainland than them, but no one will disrespect them. Now, with their status, even the leader of Yan family, they can't be compared with them. Not for anything else, just because of Xiao Yang, the supreme strongman who saved the whole fighting continent. Xiao Yang looked at the two old men and suddenly bent his knees. He knelt in the void. Looking straight at the bottom, everyone admired him. He was also envious of Yarou Lao and Xiao Zhan, who were so powerful and filial to their teachers. Old Yarou and Xiao Zhan saw this scene. Although they wanted to help Xiao Yangtang was a strong man fighting against the emperor. The real peak on the continent existed. What the strong man wanted to do was something they could stop. Therefore, the two elders could only watch Xiao Yang kowtow 10 heads. Thank you for your father's nurturing kindness. Thank you for the teacher's teaching kindness. The child is unfilial and can't serve the second old man. I hope the second old man can take care of his body in the future. Don't work too hard and focus on his own body. Xiao Yang suddenly said. The old man's face full of years was full of satisfied smiles, and his eyes were also full of white tears. If a person lives for a lifetime, it can be regarded as a worthwhile life to have such an outstanding and respectful younger generation. After thanking the two elders for their upbringing and teaching, Xiao Yang turned to look at Zhu Kuan with an envious look on his face, looked at him suspiciously and asked, Uncle Zhu Kuan, I don't know what Xian is doing now, or she doesn't want to see me off. Xiao Yang knew that everyone was reluctant to give up, which could be seen from the fact that the doctor didn't come. Therefore, the tone of Xiao Yang's words was also slightly apologetic. Hehe, nephew Xiao Yang, you don't have to ask about this. The little girl doesn't want to give up on you. You don't have to think about it. You will know it in the future. You can go at ease, haha. But what Xiao Yang didn't expect was that Zhu Kuan's reply was completely different from what he thought. When he saw Zhu Kuan's confident eyes, he didn't say anything more, but turned his body in a direction, facing those relatives and friends who had helped him at the beginning, and his eyes swept one by one from them. Liu Qing, Wu Hao and others could see that after a few breaths, Xiao Yang faced them, hugged them with both hands and bowed deeply towards them. Without looking back, he turned and walked towards the milky white energy vortex suspended in the void. The people behind him were stunned for a moment and finally calmed down. They looked at the white figure of Xiao Yang who was about to enter the vortex. Suddenly, all of them bent slightly, hugged their fists and arched in the direction of Xiao Yang. At the same time, they shouted in unison. "Congratulations to Emperor Yang! Congratulations to Emperor Yang! Congratulations to Emperor Yang!" The cry didn't stop until Xiao Yang disappeared for a long time. When shouting, no one used his fighting spirit and only used his original maximum voice. This is a kind of respect for the worshippers, but in this way, its momentum still shook the whole continent. When people shouted, no one was unwilling, because the person they shouted for was the one who saved the whole fighting continent. That person was Yang Emperor, Xiao Yang, the origin of the continent breaking through the sky. In the milky white vortex, Xiao Yang stared at the space in front of him. To be exact, it should be the thick white fog floating in the space. That's what has long disappeared in the Duki continent, and what the original Soul Emperor planned for thousands of years, even at the cost of the whole continent. The origin of the Emperor. Tut tut, the origin of the Emperor, the Soul Emperor of Heaven planned for 1,000 years for a trace of the Emperor's baby pill, but now, these origins of the Emperor are like the air. Tut tut, it's really a change of the world. As long as you become the fighting Emperor, the origin of the Emperor, tut tut, I'm afraid it's much more than the air. Unfortunately, you can't go back from this space, otherwise if you give the origin of these emperors to your father-in-law and master Zhukuan, you can create 2 strong fighting emperors out of thin air. Alas, it's a pity, really, tut tut. At the thought of this, Xiao Yang is a long sigh, but on second thought, Xiao Yang will no longer think about anything. Jiu Yuan and Zhukuan are already old and the top strong men in the fighting spirit mainland. They have long been used to the leisure life in the fighting spirit mainland. Now let them break through the system and solidify as emperors and fight with themselves in another unfamiliar world. Let alone disagree, Zun Er and Kalin will not agree. So he moved and flew away towards the white fog in front of him. While Xiao Yang was marching, he never found that the origin of the emperor was slowly gathering towards Xiao Yang at a speed invisible to the naked eye, and even passed through his clothes into Xiao Yang's body, integrating with Xiao Yang's fighting spirit and body. However, Xiao Yang, the principal, did not know at all and was still moving forward towards the thick white fog ahead. I don't know how long it took, Xiao Yang finally stopped, but he frowned and looked very ugly. Xiao Yang didn't deliberately calculate his travel time, so he didn't know how long he had gone, but it should be about 10 days and a half months, but from the beginning to now, there was still a white fog ahead, nothing. Xiao Yang once tried to change direction, but the result was the same. He couldn't find a place that looked like a way out. Xiao Yang had to expand his empire soul, but he still didn't find anything. Instead, he felt that there was something wrong with the power of his soul, but he couldn't feel what was wrong, which also made Xiao Yang's face more dignified. Until later, Xiao Yang even felt some swelling in his body. He thought he couldn't adapt to the origin of these emperors, so he tried to move faster, but he found that the faster he moved forward, the more swollen his body became. Until just now, Xiao Yang inadvertently noticed that his hands were covered with dents and small cracks. Under Xiao Yang's careful observation, Xiao Yang found that his whole body was like this. Xiao Yang was frightened and dignified at the moment. He was seriously injured without knowing it, and his body had reached the verge of collapse. Xiao Yang wanted to use fighting spirit to force suppression, but when he ran fighting spirit, he found that in such a moment, he could not mention fighting spirit, and was even more perplexed to suppress his injury. Damn, what's going on? Why, my body? My fighting spirit? How did this happen? What's the matter? Is there no stronger one above the fighting emperor? Are all the senses of the power of my soul over the years just illusions? Did those ancient strong fighting emperors die here? So what's the point of fighting the emperor? Xiao Yang's heart was angry and roared for some reason. I'm not reconciled. For my teacher, for my father, for Zuna, for my family and for the whole fighting spirit continent, I continue to cultivate, turn 9 into saints, and finally break through the system of fighting saints, incarnate into emperors and defeat the soul emperor. But why, in the end, it's just a joke. I'm not reconciled. I'm not reconciled. Xiao Yang thought of this in his heart, looked up, and made an unwilling hoarse roar in his throat, trying his best to roar to the sky. At this time, Xiao Yang's hair was scattered, his face was red, and a trace of blood continued to flow out from the crack of the skin on his face, which dyed Xiao Yang's whole body into a piece of blood red and turned into a blood man. His eyes were congested and protruded outward, his upper and lower muscles were tight, and he stood straight in place. He looked like a crazy Warcraft, very ferocious and terrible. Suddenly, Xiao Yang's body fell back, his eyes closed slowly, and the force of the soul spread and disappeared involuntarily. If someone saw this scene at this time, he would recognize that this is the precursor of the collapse of the origin of the soul. But the power of those souls did not disappear, but integrated with the origin of those emperors in an extremely strange state. Xiao Yang's body fell down at an unusually fast speed. If there was a rock right under Xiao Yang's body at this time, Xiao Yang must have been broken to pieces and died on the spot. In the process of Xiao Yang's coma and whereabouts, Xiao Yang had a dream. He dreamed of his 3 years of waste firewood, the ridicule of his people, the happiness and danger of following his teacher to the mainland, and the joys and sorrows with Zuna. But suddenly, all this began to disappear. Xiao Yang watched his relatives and friends leave him one by one. Xiao Yang wanted to leave them, but he was still powerless. Looking at Zuna, whose body shape gradually faded, Xiao Yang suddenly stretched out his hand to grasp Zuna, but he still did nothing. In his dream, Xiao Yang clenched his hands into fists, and angrily roared to the sky. "Ah, Zuna, the sky is unfair. The sky is unfair." At the same time, Xiao Yang, whose body is falling constantly in reality, also reaches out his hand, but the result is different. In his hand, there is a silver white light band. At this time, the silver white light band was struggling because of the sudden fixation, trying to break away from Xiao Yang's palm. Although Xiao Yang couldn't use his fighting spirit at this time, how powerful his physical strength was, and how could a small silver band of light break away? Therefore, after struggling for a long time without fruit, he finally stopped, as if he had collapsed, lay quietly in Xiao Yang's hand and fell down with Xiao Yang. Inexplicable familiarity here is a vast forest. At a glance, in the depths of the forest, there is a tall mountain, half red and half white, towering into the clouds and straight into the sky, like a pillar of the sky. This time, in an open space in the forest, a red flame figure is sitting on the ground. Above his head, a huge energy vortex is slowly rotating. The energy of heaven and earth is converging to it at an extremely terrible speed, forming bursts of energy gusts around, making several nearby trees fall in response to the wind. However, a white man lying on his back in the open space beside him was in a coma, but he was unharmed and was not affected by the hurricane. A moment later, the flame figure stood up from the ground, and the flame dispersed, revealing a beautiful face. In the center of his eyebrows, a half-black and half-red flame mark glowed faintly, but at the moment, he frowned, then looked at the man lying on one side. After detecting that the man was healthy, he looked up at the mountain in the distance, frowned and thought for a moment, shook his head slowly, sat cross-legged again, and quietly waited for his awakening. After a long time, Xiao Yang slowly stood up from the ground with a little cough. "I'm still alive. My injury is better." While observing the surrounding environment, Xiao Yang looked inward and checked the internal condition of his body, but he found that there was no change in his body except for the origin of the emperor. Even there was no blood flowing out after the original physical injury, which made Xiao Yang feel as if he was dreaming. When he turned around, he saw the flame figure sitting cross-legged beside him. "Hui. By the way, Hui, do you remember what we did in that space?" Xiao Yang didn't react quickly until he saw Hui, and then asked a slightly strange question in his mouth. Xiao Yang was surprised that Hui didn't appear when he was on the verge of death. Hui and he were one. Although they had their own intelligence, how could they ignore Xiao Yang when he was in danger? This made Xiao Yang feel very wrong, but he was embarrassed to ask too frankly, so he turned a corner and asked, "Remember, I also saw the whole process of your injury." Hui sighed lightly. Then he looked at Xiao Yang and replied with a little regret. He seemed to be aware of the doubt in Xiao Yang's words, and then said, "But I can't help you or even remind you, because I was sealed after I just entered the vortex. No matter how hard I struggled, it was futile." At this point, Xiao Yang also gradually understood that he almost died with his strength to fight the emperor. What can he do with the strength of Hui's 9-star fight saint now? It's good to be able to avoid accidents, let alone save people. In the past 10 years, Xiao Yi's strength has also continuously increased to the peak of the 9-star dual saint. It is only one step away from the peak of the 9-star dual saint. But even so, it is still difficult to help Xiao Yang, which makes Xiao Yi quite helpless. The name Hui is also because its appearance is no longer a baby, so Xiao Yang renamed it Hui. Moreover, because Hui now has his own intelligence, it is equivalent that the two people's thoughts focus on Xiao Yang, which makes both of them very uncomfortable. Therefore, Xiao Yang cut off their thoughts and ideas, but the different fire was Xiao Yang after all. Therefore, Xiao Yang also tried his best to peel the spirit knowledge of Huori out of the different fire at the beginning, and then used the different fire to shape a fire spirit body for Huori, and used the different fire to warm up for several years before he succeeded. Therefore, it's okay for Xiao Yang to use different fire now, and Huori has become an alternative different fire because he later practices the scroll fire making secret method Xiao Yang got at the beginning. At the end of Huori's words, his palm turned over again, a silver white light band appeared in his hand, constantly twisted and struggled, and a thin space crack appeared in the surrounding space. Xiao Yang raised his eyebrows and looked at Huori strangely. This is a ray of space power. With Xiao Yang's eyes, he can naturally see the uniqueness of this ray of space power. After all, ordinary space power is not as smart as this ray. Although the intelligence of this ray of space power is not high, it is enough to show its uniqueness. This is what you caught in that space. When I came here earlier, I found that you held it tightly, so I'll put it away for you for the time being. As soon as Xiao Yang heard that he had caught it, he immediately remembered his dream. The successive loss of relatives in the dream still made Xiao Yang feel a lingering fear until now, but fortunately it was just a dream. Otherwise, Xiao Yang really didn't know how to live. As far as Xiao Yang is concerned, no matter how strong his strength is, he will never let go of it in his heart. Zuna and Kaylin are all external objects after all. Only relatives are really worthy of Xiao Yang's life. After a little calming, Xiao Yang not only didn't stretch out his hand to catch back the silver white space, but a golden light flashed through his palm. Over his palm, a thunder dragon with a bright golden light was constantly hovering and looking at the small space force. A pair of golden eyes were full of eager to try. In his mouth, there were bursts of excited dragon chants. Xiao Jin. What are you? This golden dragon called Xiao Jin by Xiao Yang is the Joshuan golden thunder who survived because of Xiao Yang. However, his strength has been greatly reduced because of Xiao Yang, and he has fallen all the way to the level of a star. But in the accident, he regarded Xiao Yang as his relatives, which also made Xiao Yang quite speechless. However, due to the love of Xiao Xiao and other children, Xiao Yang acquiesced. After all, the Joshuan Jinlei once helped Xiao Yang, so Xiao Yang helped him recover his strength in the past 10 years, and made his strength reach the level of fighting saint and become a first-class fighting saint. But what Xiao Yang never expected was that the little guy also followed in, and now he should want to swallow up the power of this space. Xiao Yang looked at the Joshuan golden thunder in front of him, and then looked at the wisp of space power. He thought a little. He smiled and closed his palm. In an instant, Xiao Jin appeared in front of the wisp of space power like a runaway wild horse. The power of space like a small snake seemed to feel a dangerous breath. He rolled up his body and trembled constantly. Xiao Jin was excited and kept spinning around it. Suddenly, the golden light on Xiao Jin's body appeared, and the dazzling golden light was like a small sun, which made the force of that space more frightened. His body shape was constantly twisted to escape the void, but under the control of Huori, it could not escape the void in front of him anyway. Seeing this, Xiao Jin's small body twisted happily. His body moved. The 4 petite dragon claws spread out and rushed towards the force of space about the size of his body. The golden light surged and quickly wrapped the power of this small space. The little guy also kept rolling and hissing, but unfortunately, under the control of Huori, the 9-star dual saint, how can it escape from bondage? Therefore, it can only be swallowed up by Xiao Jin in bursts of small cries. Finally, a moment later, Xiao Jin uttered a pleasant sound of dragon singing, turned over in the air and fell into Xiao Yang's arm, fell into a deep sleep and began to refine the energy just obtained. Xiao Yang looked at Xiao Jin, who turned into his arm, smiled and shook his head. Then he looked at Huori and asked, by the way, where's Heian? Why isn't he with you? The black yang in Xiao Yang's mouth is the nihility swallowing inflammation in those years. At the beginning, in order to seal the Soul Emperor, he belonged to the different fire square. However, after 10 years, the Soul Emperor had already lost his soul, and nihility swallowing inflammation had already come out of the different fire square and restored his freedom. However, because he wanted to be the emperor, he always followed Xiao Yang, but refused to recognize Xiao Yang as the main body. Therefore, Xiao Yang combined some of his different fire origins with Huori, so that both sides could know each other's approximate position, so as to facilitate the mutual search after the incident that happened to Xiao Yang in the future. However, Huori didn't reply after hearing this, but turned to look at the tall red and white mountain, with a trace of doubt in his eyes. Xiao Yang looked away along Huori's line of sight. At the end of his line of sight was a tall red and white mountain that went straight into the sky. Xiao Yang frowned slightly. When he glanced at it just now, he clearly felt that there seemed to be something familiar attracting him, but that feeling flashed away, but he couldn't notice anything after one look. You should have noticed something, too. Huori looked at the huge mountain at the end of his sight and asked, Well, yes, I did sense something, but what is it? It gives me a very familiar feeling, but the feeling is so weak that I can't find out. Xiao Yang frowned slightly, replied with doubt and curiosity on his face, then took back his eyes, looked at the sky hanging above his head, and then said, "But that's why I'm a little interested in the world now." Xiao Yang said half jokingly and half seriously, then looked around and said to Huori, "Come on, let's see what it is that makes us who have been here from the future feel familiar." As soon as the voice fell, he wanted to step into the air, but the next moment, Xiao Yang's body stopped suddenly. Because just at the moment when he was fighting in his body, there was a strong wind thousands of miles around the area where Xiao Yang was. The wind and cloud suddenly rose, the sky was covered with dark clouds, and on the ground, towering giant trees fell down with the wind. Only Xiao Yang and Huori stood, and they were not affected by the hurricane. At first, Xiao Yang was startled by all this, and then he seemed to think of something. He looked at all this in front of him in surprise and was not moved by the inverted spread of these trees. This is not that he is devoid of human nature and has no fear of the world, but at the moment, the rise of fighting spirit in his body has made him excited and difficult to extricate himself. How can he pay attention to these again? This is a phenomenon that is full of fighting spirit and is about to break through. It seems that the origins of the emperors are not useless. Now I think this situation is mostly closely related to the origins of the emperors. It seems that the idea of going there should be a temporary delay. Xiao Yang sat on the ground without saying much. He had already explored with his soul perception. The people and warcraft within 1,000 miles had long been cleared by Huori, and their area would never be affected. Therefore, Xiao Yang sat cross-legged here and began to make sufficient preparations for the next breakthrough. The fighting qi in Xiao Yang's body kept running along the meridians, then condensed by different fire, and finally returned to the flame vortex in the center of the cyclone. Since Xiao Yang's strength reached the level of fighting emperor, great changes have taken place in the cyclone in his body. Before reaching duty, everyone's cyclone depends on absorbing the energy between the outside world and heaven, and then blocking it into their own body for reuse. However, as long as the strength reaches the level of fighting emperor, the cyclone in the human body will turn into a new space in its center, which is specially used to store the energy of heaven and earth absorbed by refining from the outside world. And this space will continue to expand with the enhancement of my strength. The stronger my strength is, the greater the amount of fighting spirit stored. It can greatly reduce the consumption of fighting spirit by friars during combat. Moreover, this space also has a certain isolation ability, unless the other party's strength is much higher than himself or some anti-heaven skills. Otherwise, you can't imprison the operation of fighting spirit in your body, which also greatly avoids unnecessary damage caused by some villains in the battle. Half an hour later, Xiao Yang, who sat with his eyes closed and knees crossed, opened his eyes in surprise. A Lingli flame beam burst out of his eyes and disappeared into the void. It's finally good. I haven't dared to use fighting spirit for 10 years. Now it's much happier once it runs. Huori, I'm going to break through. Go and help me protect the Dharma. In the past 10 years, Xiao Yang has been suppressing the fighting spirit in his body all the time. Otherwise, Xiao Yang would have come to the place where he is now. Xiao Yang Chang breathed out the turbid qi in his body, pressed down the excitement in his heart and said to Huori. Huori heard Xiao Yan's slightly trembling words, nodded heavily without hesitation, then jumped up and flew thousands of miles away to help Xiao Yang protect the Dharma. Xiao Yang sat quietly and made a practice not with his hands. The qi in his body began to run continuously along the meridians of the burning determination skill. With the movement of qi fighting in Xiao Yang's body, the energy between heaven and earth also continues to converge towards Xiao Yang. With the accelerating movement of qi fighting in Xiao Yang's body rises uncontrollably, and the energy of heaven and earth forms a huge energy vortex around his body. The energy of heaven and earth also gathered madly towards Xiao Yang's body along the energy vortex, entered the meridians in Xiao Yang's body, and then continuously refined and absorbed by the different fire in Xiao Yang's body, and then entered the flame vortex in the center of the cyclone through the transportation of meridians. At the moment, the space in the flame vortex is full of rich and pure milky fighting spirit, and the space is constantly expanding and contracting, as if it would only complete the breakthrough after gathering full energy and evolve into a broader space. Click. However, at this time, a crisp popping sound on Xiao Yang's fingers woke Xiao Yang up suddenly, which almost caused the mottled fighting spirit in Xiao Yang to revolt. It turned out that Xiao Yang's Yuhaina ring was forcibly cracked by this powerful energy, and the things in it piled up like a hill. If it was only normal, Xiao Yang would not pay attention to it, but now some of Xiao Xian's soul origin is still in the jade bottle in Xiao Yang's ring. If the jade bottle is accidentally crushed by this powerful energy, Xiao Xian will really disappear between heaven and earth. If the result is really like this, Xiao Yang will feel guilty for Xiao Xian all his life, which will make him depressed, produce demons, lead to no progress but retreat in cultivation, and finally become a real loser. Therefore, Xiao Yang quickly tried his best to suppress the fighting spirit of the upcoming riot in his body, spent part of the fighting spirit, wrapped the jade bottle with an energy shield to protect it, and then focused on breaking through the strength. However, Xiao Yang, who was eager to break through, did not find it. It was in the protected jade bottle. The trace of soul origin of Xiao Xian was constantly absorbing the origin of the emperor gathered by Xiao Yang's breakthrough in heaven and earth. A trace of life breath was also released from it, like a sleeping dragon twisting its body. But Xiao Yang didn't know what happened, and Huori was protecting Xiao Yang's dharma in a distant place. No one knew everything in this small jade bottle. On an open space in a vast forest, the forest at this time is like just after a big war. The trees around were uprooted and broken, and the land was covered with some broken ancient trees. Only the figure sitting cross-legged and flying in the air is still dressed in white like snow, neatly dressed, blowing with the wind, with bursts of whistling wind. Around his body, a huge energy vortex is rotating at a very fast speed, gathering the heaven and earth aura between heaven and earth, and issuing a whistling wind like ghosts crying and wolves howling. Vaguely, there are some space cracks between heaven and earth, making it look more ferocious and terrible. At the moment, Xiao Yang's body is full of qi. Like a full balloon, it is constantly shrinking and bulging. The special space is also constantly absorbing the Ju Tian aura refined by Xiao Yang, but the aura storage space that seems to be shrinking and expanding, about to break through the solid-state system and burst, is still very solid. Xiao Yang saw this more crazy operation of the burning determination skill. The fighting strength in the meridians surged wildly, and different fires ran through the meridians rapidly, refining the heaven and earth energy Xiao Yang absorbed from the outside world, but this is still not enough. Most of the heaven and earth energy is the origin of the emperor. However, Xiao Yang's different fire can't refine the origin of the emperor. When refining the energy of heaven and earth, the different fire should eliminate the origin of the emperor from it, which will make Xiao Yang's speed of absorbing the energy of heaven and earth slower. If it continues like this, the final result will be a failure. However, at this time, an unparalleled fierce suction came from elsewhere. I don't know whether it was intentional or unintentional. The suction only absorbed the origin of the emperor between heaven and earth. At this time, the origin of the emperor between heaven and earth also passed away in the direction of the suction as if it had been ordered. Xiao Yang's speed of absorbing and refining the energy of heaven and earth also accelerated, and a pure fighting spirit poured into the strange space, which increased the fighting spirit, and the space expanded more and more. Obviously, it was not far from the final rupture and expansion space. But Xiao Yang frowned slightly. What's the origin of this unknown guy? Even Hori's guard broke through. Now, if you look at the space where Xiao Yang is now from the outside, you can find that there are actually two huge energy whirlpools that originally only appeared when Xiao Yang was constantly cultivating and breaking through. Compared with the heaven and earth where Xiao Yang is, the only difference is that the vortex behind Xiao Yang is absorbing the energy of heaven and earth between heaven and earth, showing an extremely overbearing atmosphere, while the vortex opposite is absorbing the origin of the emperor between heaven and earth. The milky white origin of the emperor is like circling and dancing in the air. It slowly rotates and condenses into a mysterious droplet like milk, and disappears into the void. Although the milky whirlpool rotates very slowly, it is unexpected that all the origins of the emperor between heaven and earth have been pulled over, which is very strange. The energy absorbed by the two is different, which leads to the color of the huge energy vortex that is enough to cover one heaven and earth. It's like two giant beasts robbing the energy of heaven and earth between heaven and earth. It has a different flavor from a distance. Huori, hundreds of miles away from the distance, was slightly surprised when he saw this scene. It is reasonable that under his power, no one can break in under his defense, not to mention within 10 feet close to Xiao Yang. At the next moment, his frown stretched out again. Instead, he looked at the strange energy vortex curiously, because he just found that Xiao Yang, who was originally slow in cultivation, was gradually speeding up because of the inexplicable vortex that didn't know where he came from. So it seems that this unknown suction force is helping Xiao Yang. The faster cultivation speed means that Xiao Yang is one step closer to the breakthrough. Why bother? What on earth is that? What is the purpose of helping brother Xiao Yang? Huori thought of it while he was happy for Xiao Yang and worried. The wind is constantly blowing around Xiao Yang's body, and the energy of heaven and earth is constantly injected into Xiao Yang's body. The burning determination skill runs at a high speed, and the different fire in his body is constantly refined to absorb those mottled energy. The strange space was full of fighting spirit, and the space barrier trembled continuously, even a trace of cracks appeared. Since Xiao Yang found these cracks, he was even more excited and worked harder to absorb the energy between heaven and earth, and the origin of the Emperor between heaven and earth also gathered rapidly in another direction. Soon after, with a crisp crack, a powerful breath rose into the sky between heaven and earth, with bursts of wind roaring, like a giant dragon flying into the sky. Xiao Yang slowly opened his eyes, and a pure light flashed in front of him. Then he stood up, and a crackling sound rang. Xiao Yanhu fought a set of fist skills, and finally exhaled a long breath. Xiao Yang muttered to himself with a little excitement. I haven't experienced the feeling of promotion for a long time, but it's really comfortable. Then he looked around, frowned, and the strange vortex disappeared. Xiao Yang didn't think much anymore. After all, I had no loss, and there was no change in my body, so I naturally ignored it. After seeing the burst Yuhai ring, he leaned over and put the jade bottle into his arms. Then he rode in the void, a dark space crack appeared, put other items into it, and turned his head to fly in the direction of Huari. At Xiao Yang's present strength, he can tear the void easily. Just now, it was just a space temporarily opened up by Xiao Yang for convenience. Just at the moment when Xiao Yang put the jade bottle into his arms, the jade bottle even sent out a faint light, which even Xiao Yang didn't find. At the same time, in a magnificently decorated hall tens of thousands of miles away from Xiao Yang, an old man in white was staring at a glittering golden crystal ball in the center of the stone table in front of him with wide eyes and wide mouth. He stared at the crystal ball in front of him. He didn't react until the light of the crystal ball dissipated, then he shouted with great excitement. Divine blood! Ha ha! God helps me, Xiao Clan! Ha ha! Before the voice fell, his body disappeared into the hall, leaving only waves of Xiong Hun's heroic echo swirling in the hall. After the old man disappeared, the crystal ball suddenly glowed again after calming down for a while. This time, the light was even more brilliant than the previous golden light, and even sent out a colorful light. The whole hall was dazzling. It was a pity that the old man had left and had no chance to see this dazzling scene again. This video will end here.